This is the main news of Korea today. President Yoon's wealth has decreased slightly since taking office in May compared to when he was a presidential candidate. Former President Moon's assets have increased since his retirement. According to the Public Service Ethics Committee on the 26th, President Yoon reported a total of 7.63999 billion won worth of property under the name of himself and his wife, Kim Gun-hee, as a result of the first property registration since the inauguration of the Yoon Suk-yeol administration. Earlier in February, President Yoon reported 7.74 billion won in assets to the National Election Commission when he was the presidential candidate for the People's Power. Since taking office, his wealth has decreased by about 100 million won. Yoon and his wife held most of their property as deposits. Yoon owns 525.953 million won in deposits and Kim owns 4.99934 billion won in his own name, respectively. Mrs. Kim's deposits were divided into two commercial banks, and 6.26 million won out of President Yoon's deposits was insurance. In addition, Acrobista in Sokhodong, Seoul, where President Yoon and his wife currently reside, was under the name of Mrs. Kim. A total of 26 square meters of land and 160 square meters of buildings were registered at 1.8 billion won. The apartment price was reported at 1.559 billion won in February, but rose by 240 million won in the past few months. Meanwhile, Moon reported 2.56 billion won in assets as of May when he was retiring. This is an increase of 370 million won from 2.19 billion won in assets as of the end of 2021 before retirement. Former President Moon's assets also accounted for a significant proportion of deposits. Deposits under former President Moon's name amounted to 1.2 billion won, up about 800 million won from the end of last year. Mrs. Kim held a deposit of 360 million won without much difference from the previous report. The deposits of former President Moon and his wife totaled 1.56 billion won, accounting for more than half of the total registered property. In addition, the value of buildings owned by former President Moon and his wife increased by about 1 billion won to 3.58 billion won. On the other hand, the land price was 410 million won, down about 70 million won from the previous one. Former President Moon also reported that he had repaid all 389 million won in financial institution debt he had previously had. On the other hand, his wife, Kim, reported 600 million won in interperson debt. The Seoul metropolitan government has set an internal policy that it is highly likely to spread to rallies at Gwangae-Wamon Square or that it will not be allowed to hold events with political purposes. It is also considering installing fences to prevent entering the square after rallies and demonstrations nearby. Video content transmitted from the plaza will also be strictly limited to culture and art. The plan is to thoroughly manage Gwangae-Wamon Square, which reopened on the 6th of this month, as a citizen-only resting place. The North Korean Human Rights Policy Council, a consultative body between government ministries on North Korean human rights, was held on the 25th, 2 years and 3 months after May 2020. The Unification Ministry held the 2022 First North Korean Human Rights Policy Council presided over by the Vice Minister of Unification at the Unification Ministry's conference room later in the day. I think it is meaningful to have the first Human Rights Policy Council in North Korea since the inauguration of the Yoon Suk-yeol administration. I hope that there will be substantial discussions on the human rights status of North Koreans as well as the current status of policies to promote human rights in the Yoon administration, the ministry said in a greeting. The current government is currently planning to publish a report on the status of human rights in North Korea and the government's evaluation of it, and we will discuss how to do it at today's meeting, he said. The North Korean Human Rights Policy Council was formed under Article 17 of the Enforcement Decree of the North Korean Human Rights Act for cooperation and consultation between ministries on North Korean human rights issues, chaired by the Vice Minister of Unification and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Its main functions include consultation and coordination on North Korean human rights promotion policies, collecting opinions on human rights records, establishing basic and enforcement plans for North Korea's human rights promotion, exchanging and sharing information on North Korea's human rights issues. President Yoon said on the 25th, the excuse that it is the fault of the former administration no longer works for the people. President Yoon attended the People's Power banquet held at the Talent Education Training Institute and said, the ruling party and the government should only think about the people's livelihood. President Yoon said, although our administration was inaugurated in a bad report card and international economic crisis, excuses for the international situation and excuses that it inherited from the previous administration will no longer work for the people, adding, from now on, all difficult problems will be solved and the government and party will be trusted by the people. President Yoon said, the combination of the party and the administration is called the government, so I hope today's meeting will be an opportunity to serve the people properly. The banquet was attended by 115 lawmakers from the People's Power Party and all government ministers and vice ministers. It was designed to refine legislative tasks ahead of the regular session of the National Assembly, while promoting unity between the ruling party and the government. The ruling and opposition parties engaged in a war of words over the Board of Audit and Inspection's intense audit of the heads of state-run organizations, who have remained in place since their appointment under the former government. The Democratic Party of Korea strongly protested that it was an indiscriminate target and retaliation audit, while the Power of the People covered the Board of Audit and Inspection as an effort to realize justice, albeit belatedly. At a policy coordination meeting held on the morning of the 25th, the Democratic Party of Korea threatened, the Board of Audit and Inspection will audit policies such as the closure of nuclear power plants and the corona vaccine project. Floor Leader Park then said, the Board of Audit and Inspection, a constitutional and independent organization, has focused on political audits and target audits, and the inside is festering. Secretary General, you should not intimidate innocent internal members but resign immediately. In particular, Floor Leader Park raised his voice, saying, the law is far away and the fist is close, but in the Yoon Suk-yeol administration, the power agency must be loyal before the law. However, the power of the people is the thief is asleep right now, and responded, what is there to be afraid of if you are confident? The Democratic Party's claim for political audit is a distortion, said Representative Power of the People's Party in a post on his Facebook page. It is evidence that the assessment agency that malfunctioned during the Moon Jae-in government is normalizing. The Yoon Suk-yeol government has no choice but to do it because the Moon Jae-in government has passed the issue that should have been audited, Floor Leader Kwon said. The Moon Jae-in government was noisy about promoting K-quarantine, but it was not able to supply vaccines in time. In addition, Floor Leader Kwon pointed out, how many crimes have the Democratic Party committed, do they oppose the Board of Audit and Inspection's regular work? Adding, it is a move to admit that the purpose of holding the national government ankle was to take care of the Democratic Party's bulletproof vest. Former President Park Geun-hye was spotted at a hotel in Gangnam-gu, Seoul on the evening of the 25th. Former President Park was seen entering a hotel Chinese restaurant with 5 to 6 people. Former President Park wore a navy blue jacket, white pants, and a mask. When he tried to take a picture, lawyer Yu, who was included in the group, stopped taking pictures. It is the first time in 107 days that former President Park has been revealed since she attended the inauguration ceremony of President Yoon Suk-yeol at the National Assembly on May 10. Those who had dinner with former President Park were not exactly known except for Yu. As a result, attention is focused on the reason why former President Park, who is staying at his private residence in Dalsonggun, Daegu, visited Seoul. Former President Park was released on December 31 last year after receiving a special pardon after being sentenced to 22 years in prison for manipulating state affairs. Since then, former President Park has been hospitalized at Samsung Medical Center to treat his deteriorated health due to imprisonment, and was discharged from the hospital on March 24 to stay at his private residence in Dalsonggun, Daegu. Political circles interpret that former President Park came to Seoul to check her health condition. Ahn Min-sok, a member of the Democratic Party of Korea, known as Choi Soon-sil's sniper, was sent to the prosecution for defamation of false information related to the allegation of Choi's hidden property trillions. Ahn is also drawing keen attention to whether the Supreme Court ruling on Choi's claim for damages, which is said to have been damaged by the spread of false information, will have an impact. The Osan police station in Gyeonggi province sent Ahn to the prosecution last week on charges of defamation following the spread of false information. Choi's lawyer said, it is true that Ahn was sent to the prosecution. Some of the remarks mentioned by Rep. Ahn are subject to the police's reply from the German prosecution, but the investigation is suspended because there has been no reply, he said. Ahn has raised suspicions of Choi's hidden property since late 2016 when allegations were raised that Choi was a secret power of former President Park Geun-hye. In addition, Ahn visited 5 European countries for 8 nights and 9 days in July 2017, saying he was tracking the Choi family's assets. In response, Choi filed a complaint with the Seoul Central District Prosecutor's Office in September 2019 against Ahn for defamation following the spread of false information. The case was transferred from the Seoul Central District Prosecutor's Office to the Suwon District Prosecutor's Office. Since then, the prosecution has been transferred to Osan Police Station as it has been unable to directly investigate defamation crimes due to the adjustment of investigative rights. Ahn has also filed a lawsuit against Choi for damages. The first trial court ruled in favor of Choi, but the ruling was overturned in the second trial. The case is pending in the Supreme Court. The prosecution's decision to send the police's indictment is drawing attention as it is related to Ahn and Choi's civil litigation. Ahn is facing a Supreme Court ruling with a lawsuit filed by Choi to claim damages for spreading false information. In September last year, the first trial court ruled in favor of Choi in a lawsuit filed by Choi against Ahn, saying, Ahn should pay Choi 100 million won and pay 12% interest per year until he pays all damages. However, the ruling was overturned in the second trial. The court ruled in May that at the time of the defendant On's remarks, the plaintiff Choi used his close relationship with former President Park Geun-hye to manipulate state affairs, adding, the defendant's remarks were also an extension of this controversy, and the contents are about public understanding. Meanwhile, Ahn is set to make a Supreme Court ruling as Choi appealed in June against the ruling of the appeals court. The possibility that the sending of opinions on indictment will affect future trials cannot be ruled out. Regarding the abusive protests that have continued near Moon's home in Yangsan, South Gyeongsang Province, former lawmaker Lee Yen-ju criticized the act of bullying with all kinds of abusive language and loud voices in front of the retired president's house is contrary to the spirit of freedom, responsibility, and rule of law. Former lawmaker Lee Yen-ju said on Facebook on the 26th, if Moon and his wife are at fault, they will be dealt with in the judicial order, adding, freedom of expression and protest should be exercised toward power, not to bully anyone. Former lawmaker Lee Yen-ju said, if someone does not appeal to the judicial system just because they are dissatisfied, but personally lynching and bullying them, it can be said to be a barbaric society. In order to become such a society so that the freedom and safety of the good people are not violated, the state exists and public power exists, he said. That's why the country has laws and freedom is responsible. It is liberal democracy that faithfully follows these principles. Moon Junyoung, the son of former President Moon, said, please be careful about the wanted poster for him. Moon said on Facebook on the 24th, there was also a court ruling that the poster I wanted was an insult and an infringement of personal rights. The court explained that no matter how much public issues are raised, we should choose an expression that respects the other person's personality, he said. The photo posted by Moon contained phrases such as Moon Junyoung's national wanted and the soul of free earrings. He also changed former President Moon's presidential slogan, people come first, to finding people comes first. The problem with this case is that this degree of contempt and ridicule was considered insignificant, Moon said. There have been similar forms for many people since then, and it got worse and was finally used by the Liberty Korea Party. He then said, despair and ridicule have been instigated and are still spreading widely, adding, maybe it is considered freedom of expression, but now it is reaching the corner of the countryside. He said, we all seem to be getting dull, and we all seem to be getting vicious together. The term countryside corner seems to refer to former President Moon's house located in Pyeongsan village, Yangsan Si, Gyeongsang-nam near Moon's house. Conservative groups and YouTubers are swearing at Moon and playing military songs or hymns with loudspeakers during the rally. Earlier, Moon won some of the damages suit against Yoon Jun-gil, a former spokesman for the Liberty Korea Party's National Election Commission, who distributed posters that made him a wanted person. The Seoul Southern District Court ruled on the 18th that lawyer Yoon Jun-gil should be paid 7 million won, saying, there are some points to accept the plaintiff's claim that personality rights have been violated. The August National Convention, which selects the new leadership of the Democratic Party of Korea, is just 2 days away. While Lee Jae-myung is likely to be elected as the party leader, the pro-Lee Jae-myung faction and the candidates for the non-Lee Jae-myung faction's Supreme Council are competing until the last minute. An official from the Democratic Party of Korea said, the party leader and the candidates for the Supreme Council are gathering votes until the end, crushing the floor. Voting for members of the Seoul and Gyeonggi Rights Party will be held for 2 days from the 25th. Public opinion surveys and general party members' polls will be conducted from the 26th to the 27th. On the day of the National Convention on the 28th, a delegate vote will be held. The final result will be announced on the 28th, adding up the percentage of votes reflected by 40% of right-wing members, 30% of representatives, 25% of public opinion polls and 5% of general opinion polls. On the 26th, the Democratic Party of Korea will reintroduce a revision to Article 80 of the party's constitution, which is under fire for Lee Jae-myung's bulletproof controversy, to the party's Central Committee to push for a resolution. In the party, internal conflicts are escalating as there are many objections such as a violation of the principle of absence of double jeopardy over the fact that the Emergency Committee immediately revised the party constitution after the Central Committee's rejection 2 days ago. The Democratic Party of Korea will hold a Central Committee meeting and vote on the revision of the party constitution again. Earlier on the 24th, the Central Committee proposed amendments to the party constitution, such as the voting system for all rights members and suspension of duty at the time of prosecution, but were rejected as the vote in favor fell short of the majority amid controversy over a Lee Jae-myung shrinization. Since then, the Emergency Committee, which is the party's leadership, has reintroduced a revised bill that revised the suspension of duty in case of prosecution, excluding the voting system for all members of the right party. The revision passed the party committee again the previous day and received a second vote from the Central Committee. Non-Lee Jae-myung lawmakers have raised criticism that the revision of the Emergency Committee is against the principle or convention of the absence of double jeopardy over putting it back on the Central Committee in 2 days. The Korean government has won a 3 trillion won overseas nuclear power plant construction project. It is the first time in 13 years since the order was received from Barak, a nuclear power plant in the United Arab Emirates in 2009. The order is also expected to speed up the achievement of the Yoon Suk-yeol government's goal of exporting 10 nuclear power plants by 2030. The Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy announced on the 25th that Korea Hydro and Nuclear Power Co. has won a 3 trillion won project to build a nuclear power plant in Egypt with ASEJSC, a subsidiary of Russia's state-run nuclear power plant company Rosatom. This large-scale nuclear power plant order is the first entry into the African nuclear power plant market after the Middle East in 2009. The project is a large-scale project to build 4 1,200 megawatt nuclear power plants in the Egyptian coastal city of El Dabba. The total project cost is $30 billion, and the owner is the Egyptian Atomic Energy Agency. In 2017, JSCACE, a subsidiary of Russia's state-run nuclear power plant company Rosatom, won the order. At the end of last year, KHNP was selected as the sole negotiator for the construction project of the El Dabba nuclear power plant, including the supply of turbine buildings and equipment, and won the final contract. The size will be 3 trillion won, and KHNP will participate from next year to 2029. Industry Minister Lee Chong-yang said, "This order for the El Dabba project is the first tangible result linked to the Yoon Suk-yeol government's strong nuclear power plant export policy," adding, "The change in nuclear power plant policy and strong willingness to promote exports contributed to the success of the contract." The government expects the El Dabba project to be an opportunity to restore the nuclear industry's ecosystem by supplying work to local nuclear power plants, whose orders have plummeted during the denuclearization policy. KHNP plans to hold a briefing session next month to encourage local nuclear power plant equipment makers to participate. It is expected to play a positive role in promoting our technology in overseas nuclear power plant markets such as the Czech Republic and Poland in the future. Our company is highly regarded by customers around the world for complying with the plant budget and air. The relatively low cost of building nuclear power plants is also a major competitive advantage. The unit price of Korea's nuclear power plant is $3,571 per kilowatt, which is more competitive in price than that of China, the United States, Russia, and France. There have also been ups and downs in the recent order for the El Dabba nuclear power plant. Prior to the final contract, unexpected situations such as the Russia-Ukraine war acted as variables. Initially, the final contract was scheduled for April this year, but it took time to make final adjustments, with one delay to the end of June. The Ministry of Trade, Industry, and Energy is planning to provide all-round support to the domestic nuclear power plant industry to actively enter overseas markets, centering on the Nuclear Power Export Strategy Promotion Committee. It plans to conduct high-level sales diplomacy in countries such as the Czech Republic and Poland, and strengthen government-level efforts such as linking cooperative projects between countries. The President's office has started to prevent the spread of anxiety, saying that it is still managed stably according to related indicators as the red light on the Korean economy, such as a rise in exchange rates due to the strong dollar and a deficit in the trade balance. The exchange rate itself is the highest since the global financial crisis, but in conclusion, it is not a situation to worry about the financial crisis or the foreign exchange crisis, the senior economic secretary said in a briefing at the presidential office on the 25th. The rise in the exchange rate is a common phenomenon around the world due to the strong dollar, he said. There is no need to be anxious because the two measures, the foreign exchange rate and CD's premium indicators, are very good, and the foreign exchange reserves and the external safety plate are stable. The sharp rise in the exchange rate has a negative impact on prices and people's livelihoods, so the government is never wary of the foreign exchange market, he said. If speculative movements occur, we will actively respond to market stabilization measures. Regarding the trade balance, the chief economic officer of the President's office also said, the biggest reason for this year's deficit is rising prices of crude oil, natural gas, and coal, adding, however, I stress once again that there is no big problem with external credibility as the current account continues to be in the black. Kim Yong-ha, a professor of IT finance and management at Suncheon University, suggested on the 25th that the national pension premium rate should be raised from the current 9% to 17% and the starting age of payment should be raised from 65 to 68. Professor Kim said in a special lecture on pension reform issues and directions at the 2022 National Assembly held at the Talent Education Training Institute, the pension fund will be completely depleted in 2057. If you do two things, you can create a pension system that allows you to receive pensions until the age of 100. Professor Kim said, we are not suddenly raising the premium rate to 17%. All the government has to do in 5 years is raise only 2 percentage points. Each time the government changes, it is 17% if it raises only 4 times by 2 percentage points, and the starting age of payments, which is set to be 65 years old and 33, should be raised gradually from 2038 to 66, from 2043 to 68, and from 2048. The basic direction of pension reform is to match what you pay and what you receive, that is, to change the structure of receiving 1.88 times to one-fold, he said. Japan's income replacement rate is almost the same as Korea, but Japan raised the premium rate to 18%. Korea needs to raise it to that extent to achieve a balance, he said. Our party is focusing on financial sustainability, but the opposition party is expected to continue to insist on retirement income guarantee. The issue of guaranteeing retirement income is a current problem, and fiscal sustainability is a future problem, he said. We have to decide how to redistribute between generations and redistribute within generations. With 3 buffers, youth unemployment, low female employment, and low early retirement of middle and elderly people, it will last until 2035, but not after 2035. Measures should be taken from now on, he said. It is time to decide whether to push for pension reform and be recorded as a responsible party or an accomplice like the former regime that broke down the future pension without pension reform. According to the Ministry of Health and Welfare on the 25th, the government is considering strengthening the qualifications of foreign health insurance dependents to more than 6 months of stay in Korea. Health insurance dependents are a system that allows people who depend on their parents or children who work because they have no economic power to receive medical coverage even if they do not pay health insurance premiums. If certain income and property standards and support requirements are met, Koreans or foreigners can become dependents of work subscribers. As of the end of July this year, there were 1,253,98 foreign health insurance subscribers, of which 193,698 were dependent. The government has continued to strengthen the eligibility requirements for dependents by reorganizing the health insurance premium system. The income standard will be eliminated from dependents if the annual combined comprehensive taxable income exceeds 34 million won, but from September this year, the standard will be lowered to more than 20 million won. Property standards will be eliminated if the property tax base exceeds 900 million won, or if the annual income exceeds 10 million won and the tax base exceeds 540 million won. However, it is difficult to grasp the income or property of foreigners. It is said that it is easier to register dependents than Koreans. An official from the Korea Health Insurance Corporation said, it is impossible to identify the income and property of foreigners who come from abroad and stay for a short period of time, adding, if a family is a work subscriber, if you register as a foreigner within 90 days of entering the country, you will rarely be eliminated. As a result, some foreign job subscribers invited their families living abroad to Korea to register as their dependents if they were seriously ill, receive medical treatment at a local hospital, and enjoy health insurance benefits. President Yoon pointed out this case through Facebook during the presidential election and said, "We will solve the problem of foreign health insurance." The Ministry of Health and Welfare reported this year's work plan to President Yoon on the 19th and announced that it would push for measures to improve the standards of foreign dependents. The government is considering ways to protect good foreign subscribers while excluding those who leave the country after receiving health insurance benefits without paying any health insurance premiums. In the case of foreigners, it is highly likely that they will be able to register as dependents 6 months after entering Korea. However, it is expected that direct descendants such as spouses or underage children will be able to be registered as dependents immediately after entering the country without a 6-month limit. An official from the Ministry of Health and Welfare said, if foreign dependents are restricted to 6 months of stay, it may be difficult to go to the hospital even if the spouse or minor children of expatriates entering Korea are sick. As the Bank of Korea raises its key interest rate again, the screams of young and debt-ridden people are growing. This is because if the benchmark interest rate rises, banks will raise their receiving rates, and accordingly, loan rates are likely to rise in a series. Experts believe that variable interest rates on mortgage loans at the end of the year could reach the 7% range. It is the first time since the financial crisis. On the 25th, the Bank of Korea raised its key interest rate by 0.25 percentage points. As a result, the benchmark interest rate reached 2.5%. The increase is the first 4 consecutive times in history since April, May, and July, and has risen by as much as 2 percentage points since August last year. The increase in the benchmark interest rate is expected to increase the interest burden on borrowers. Currently, the floating rate of mortgage loans at commercial banks is 6.11%. Commercial banks are lowering their own interest rates, but last month, KOFIX, the standard for floating rate mortgage loans, jumped 0.52 percentage points in the past month due to the influence of the big step, and the floating rate has also entered the 6% range again. If the benchmark interest rate rises, banks raise their receiving rates, so the affected KOFIX will rise together. This is because the receiving rate becomes the loan procurement rate, and the deposit rate of commercial banks is expected to enter the 4% range annually by the end of this year. When the Bank of Korea raised its key interest rate by 0.25% in May and June, KOFIX rose by 0.14% and 0.4%, respectively. Even if it rises at least 0.1 percentage point this month, KOFIX will enter the 3% range. It is the first time since January 2013 that KOFIX has exceeded 3%. Fast-forward banks have already announced higher rates. Hana Bank has decided to raise interest rates on 8 types of deposit products and 18 types of installment savings products by up to 0.3 percentage points from the 26th. Nongyeop Bank has decided to raise interest rates on deposits and installment savings by up to 0.4 percentage points from the 29th. The rest of the banks are also planning to raise interest rates. Apartment prices across the country fell by the largest drop in 10 years as buying sentiment froze sharply due to interest rate hikes and the government's announcement of large-scale supply measures. Apartment transactions in Seoul have continued to be at an all-time low last month and this month, and apartment sales have been on the rise since the government announced supply measures in August. Experts predict that the Bank of Korea's announcement of an additional base rate hike on the 25th will further dampen buying sentiment, which will continue to lead to a fall in the market and a sharp drop in trading volume. According to the Korea Real Estate Agency on the 25th, apartment sales prices nationwide fell 0.14% this week from the previous week, far exceeding last week's decline. In terms of the decline alone, it is the largest in 10 years since August 6, 2012. The Seoul metropolitan area and Seoul also saw a wider decline. The Seoul metropolitan area has fallen by the largest margin since January 14, 2013, and Seoul has fallen by March 4, 2019. By region, the decline in Seoul's 4 Gangnam districts, a key area, is also expanding. Apartment prices in Gangnam-gu, Sokho-gu, Songpa-gu, and Gangdong-gu have all fallen, while Yongsan-gu, which had been effective in relocating the president's office, has also fallen. Naeun-gu, Dobong-gu, Yunpyeong-gu, and Jeomgan-gu, which are areas outside Seoul, have seen much greater declines this week compared to key areas. In the case of Seoul, the downward revision of the sale price continues amid quiet purchase inquiries due to expectations of additional interest rate hikes and concerns that housing prices will continue to decline. In the future, the law will be revised to impose a business cancellation on used car dealers caught selling and deceiving them that they were flooded. In addition, employees who sold the vehicle are expected to be expelled from the industry for 3 years. The scope of disclosure of information related to submerged vehicles will also be greatly expanded. The Ministry of Land, Infrastructure, and Transport announced on the 25th a plan to prevent illegal distribution of submerged vehicles. This is a response to the growing public anxiety over the illegal distribution of flooded vehicles due to the record heavy rain in 115 years. According to the Korea Insurance Development Institute's tally from the 1st to the 19th of this month, the number of damage caused by flooding of vehicles amounted to 11,841 cases, with the amount of compensation alone reaching 157 billion won. According to the plan to prevent illegal distribution, the revision of the Automobile Management Act will be carried out so that used car dealers can immediately cancel their business if they are caught hiding the flooding and selling vehicles. In addition, a mechanic who conceals the fact of maintenance of a flooded car will impose a 6-month suspension of the project or a fine of 10 million won, and the mechanic will establish a new punishment clause to suspend his duties. Performance checkers who do not list the immersion room are sentenced to 6 months of suspension or up to 2 years in prison. Former Vice Justice Minister Lee Young-koo, who was put on trial for assaulting a taxi driver while drunk, was sentenced to probation in the first trial. A leading legal person, who was mentioned as the first candidate for the head of the Senior Civil Servant Corruption Investigations Unit, was even found guilty of instigating the destruction of evidence of criminal cases involving him, facing an ignominious situation. On the 25th, the Criminal Settlement Department of the Seoul Central District Court sentenced former Vice Justice Minister Lee Young-koo to 6 months in prison and 2 years of probation for assaulting drivers in violation of the Act on Aggravated Punishment of Specific Crimes. Police Officer A, who was accused of dereliction of duty, was acquitted. On November 6, 2020, when he was a lawyer, the former Vice Justice Minister was put on trial for assaulting a taxi driver B, who drove him in front of his apartment in Sokho-dong, Seoul, drunk. In addition, he was accused of instructing B to delete the black box video. At that time, the former Vice Minister was mentioned as the first candidate for the head of the Airborne Division. Afterwards, the former Vice Minister agreed with B, and the police closed the internal investigation by applying assault charges under the General Criminal Law, not a special law that can be prosecuted regardless of B's intention. Nearly 2 years after the incident, the court found all charges against the former Vice Justice Minister guilty. Some point out that it is more painful to be found guilty of the subsequent charge of the evidence destruction teacher than the assault that occurred while drunk. The court judged that it was reasonable to believe that there was intentional, saying, as a legal expert, I think I could have sufficiently devised a way to avoid the risk of evidence destruction teachers. The former Vice Justice Minister is not guilty of assaulting a taxi driver, causing traffic accidents and causing danger to third parties. In addition, the crime is even worse because it teaches the destruction of evidence to avoid or reduce criminal punishment, he pointed out. Kim Jin-ah, the Korean branch of Meta and the new CEO of Facebook Korea, made the remarks through the Metaverse media briefing at the Education Field event held at the Palace Hotel on the 25th. Kim made his first public appearance since taking office. He defined the Metaverse as the next-generation internet that transcends time and space, and stressed that the Korean market has a great potential for growth. CEO Kim said, Korea is leading the Metaverse sector with its foundation and content capabilities built up as an information and communication powerhouse, and thus it is a market with high growth potential. Meta introduced a case of Metaverse use in the field of education at the event. When Meta changed its mission in October last year, it announced its corporate vision to focus on building a three-dimensional virtual world called Metaverse. Kim will make every effort to realize this vision in Korea. A U.S. federal court ordered on the 25th to disclose the oath statement, which was the basis for issuing a warrant for seizure and search of former President Trump's home. However, the court required the public to disclose an edited version of sensitive information. A federal court in Miami, Florida, decided that the Department of Justice should disclose it by noon on the 26th. The affidavit is a document that describes the basis for the judgment of the investigative agency, which had no choice but to apply for a seizure and search warrant, including contact with witnesses. The Ministry of Justice has so far opposed the disclosure on the grounds that it could disrupt the investigation if it is disclosed. In response, the court proposed disclosing an edited version of sensitive information, and the Ministry of Justice submitted an oath to the court in an edited state. For this reason, even if the Ministry of Justice releases an oath, it is highly likely that much of the core content will be hidden. The FBI then secured 11 confidential document files, including first-class secrets, in the raid. Trump asked the court to stop reviewing the seized documents and form a separate review group consisting of neutral experts. U.S. Republican Senator Martha Blackburn visited Taiwan on the night of the 25th. It is the fourth time this month that a U.S. politician, including U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, will visit Taiwan. According to the Free Times of Taiwan, Blackburn arrived in Taiwan on a U.S. military plane that night. Blackburn is expected to meet with Taiwanese President Tsai Ing-wen on Wednesday to talk about security and economic relations between the United States and Taiwan. "We just arrived in Taiwan to send a message to China," Blackburn tweeted. "We will not be threatened. The U.S. remains firm in maintaining global freedom," he said. "And we will not tolerate efforts to weaken our nation and our allies." Blackburn is known as one of the politicians who directly criticizes the Chinese Communist Party. Rep. Nancy Pelosi, the U.S. House Speaker of the House of Representatives, spoke out of support during her visit to Taiwan earlier this month. The Liberty Times noted that Blackburn is the fourth U.S. politician to visit Taiwan this month, and explained that it shows Washington's strong support for Taiwan. Following Speaker Pelosi, who is ranked third in the U.S. protocol on the 2nd, 5 members of the Senate and House of Representatives, including Senator Ed Markey, visited Taiwan on the 14th and Governor Eric Holcomb of Indiana on the 21st. China did not immediately offer a position, but it is expected to strongly oppose it. After Pelosi's visit to Taiwan, China has been raising tensions by conducting massive military exercises near Taiwan. Former U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, known as a hardline Chinese, will also visit Taiwan next month. Former Minister Pompeo is expected to visit Taiwan for a 2-day visit to deliver a keynote speech at the Global Taiwan Business Forum in Kaohsiung on the 27th of next month. Itaru Nakamura, the Minister of the National Police Agency, has expressed his intention to resign, taking responsibility for the attack on former Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. It has been about 2 months since Abe died. According to NHK and Fuji News Network, Minister Nakamura held a press conference on the 25th and said, "We will fundamentally review the security law and strictly change the security system to prevent this from happening again." Abe was shot dead by an unidentified gunman during a campaign for the upper house of parliament in Japan on the 8th of last month. Shortly after the incident, Minister Nakamura mentioned that he was responsible for being the police chief in charge of the prefectural police. Nakamura's resignation will be decided at a cabinet meeting on Wednesday, NHK said. The National Police Agency announced the results of verification of Abe's shooting death, such as a vacuum in rearguard and lack of information sharing, and announced its plan to fundamentally review the security posture. Thank you for watching today. Please subscribe and like.